That's right. You can make it your good deed. And to tell us how we can help, we are joined by the chairman of the council for the TTSPCA, Masita Kuruvala. And it is not your first time here on the Now Morning Show, so welcome back and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much for having me back. It's a pleasure.
Now, when the TTSPCA comes to the Now, we always check in with them to see how things are going so that we are familiar, and we will do exactly that. But if somebody is unfamiliar, what exactly or who exactly is the TTSPCA?
Okay, we're the Trinidad and Tobago Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. We do have a broader mandate, which is really trying to work hard to change the situation in Trinidad as far as the welfare of animals are concerned. But I think we're best known really for the operation of our shelters. We have one in Port of Spain and one in Bacalet and Tobago. And these shelters take in sort of unwanted, lost, abandoned animals. And we try to rehabilitate and rehome these animals. The shelters are also a focus for education and volunteerism. We have quite a strong volunteer group that supports the shelter.
Now, in terms of the shelter itself or the organization altogether, this is non-governmental and this is funded usually thanks to great people.
Right, it's an NGO. It's been around for about 100 years. It was originally affiliated to the RSPCA in the UK, but it's no longer affiliated. So yes, funding is always a big concern. In the past, we've managed to get by with donations and so on, and some charges. We have small charges for services,
right?
You know, giving in of animals. We run a spay clinic and that kind of thing. We also do a lot of fundraising to keep going. Things were particularly difficult after COVID, when everything sort of fell apart. The cost of inputs really rose quite significantly. And a lot of the people that we were assisting could no longer manage to even contribute small donations to services. So last year we went into crisis funding mode, and we really put out a strong appeal to the public, because we were afraid that we would have to close down the facilities. And we had a great response from the public and the private sector. I mean, we were just overwhelmed by the concern of the public and the support that we got. So we are still going.
I'm so glad to hear that, to be honest.
It's still going.
It is actually why I dovetailed into funding, because I think that we don't understand, we, general public, don't understand a lot of the services that are offered and a lot of the value that the TTSPCA brings. So while you kind of skirted over that we do offer some services, I think it's important to underscore that many of these services are significantly discounted in comparison to other institutions, yes?
Certainly. I mean, we do have a small charge to take in animals from people. We ask usually, like if we're taking a dog, that we ask them to contribute $200. Now, all these animals have to be treated. We run the place almost like a medical institution, because you have to be very careful with sanitation, disease spread, and so on. And you want the animals that go out to be healthy, well socialized, spayed and neutered, and so on, because we want them to fit into the homes properly and settle in well with the owners. So a lot of effort is put into running the institution. We have office staff. Our phones ring continuously all day. We have animal care staff. We care for both dogs and cats. And we have veterinary support. So we run a spay clinic at the facility once a week, and the services of the spay clinic are much reduced. You know, they're probably less than half of the normal cost. So we offer quite a lot of services. People are always calling us for advice and things like that. So we're always exceedingly busy with work. And we do also put an effort into, oversight over legislation, trying to agitate for improvements in the welfare of animals, trying to seek implementation of legislation and enforcement and so on. So it's quite a broad
and a large undertaking.
It's a large undertaking. I think particularly because at the moment, or the last couple of years, really there are no other services. I mean, we have NGOs operating all over the country on different scales, but the public services as a whole have kind of collapsed. So we're under quite a bit of pressure.
Now, I asked particularly about those additional duties, if you will, like the advocacy and the legislature, because those are things that we don't always hear of in terms of updates as well. So while the funding is some good news, let's touch a little bit on those sorts of that sort of advocacy, because the conversation is particularly looking at those abandoned or pets that have escaped. And we know coming out of the New Year celebrations, we may have had higher instances of that. And I wondered if there was any conversation, any movement on the conversation where fireworks usage in residential areas and the protection of pets or animals, even like in the zoo, was concerned. Are there any updates or changes there?
There are no updates. Of course, every year we put out the advisories to the public about keeping their own animals safe, and letters go out to the Ministry of Legal Affairs about the status of the legislation. But I think there was a bill was prepared with some modifications to the fireworks legislation, but that hasn't had any movement. And the existing fireworks legislation is pretty outdated, but it's pretty specific to how and where fireworks can be used by the public, but it's completely ignored. It's really difficult to implement and enforce that kind of legislation. I think it's...
So more reasons that we need to have the TTSPCA stick around for another 100 years or so. Hopefully having changed well within that. But it brings me to the opportunity to ask how volunteers can get involved. Because you did mention that as much as you have all of these different bodies or persons, in terms of departments, a lot of it is volunteerism. So how can we get involved as members of the public?
Well, there's a lot of interest in volunteering in the shelters. We have school groups. A lot of companies have shown an interest, so we get company groups who say, we want to come in and spend a day volunteering. Often they will put together a nice package of donated stuff for us as well. They come in. Often it's to do with enrichment, so it's socialization of the animals, that kind of thing, walking them, that sort of thing. But we're also grateful because groups do their own fundraising or hold their own events. We also get assistance from volunteers with events that we have, whether they're fundraising or whether we are going out with the animals just to promote the work and so on. So we have our core staff, which we absolutely depend on, because the animals need care 7 days a week. And, there are protocols and everything that we have to abide by. But the volunteers make that bit of extra difference to give the animals a bit more. I mean, socialization is really important.
I know.
Because otherwise you have animals that can't fit into a home environment.
Right. And I recently learned anxious animals as well, because we humans can pass that on specifically to our domesticated pets. So let's go into the conversation a little bit on those lost animals, particularly coming out of that New Year celebration, since we saw so many dogs being lost. And so many being found but not placed at the right home or not sure where to place them. What should we do?
Well, I checked when I was at the shelter yesterday, and we have about 9 lost dogs in at the moment. Sometimes you're not sure if they're abandoned or lost. There's a lot of abandonment at Christmas time. what we try to do is advertise. We put it out on our social media and say, okay, these are the ones that have come in, this is the area, and so on. So we really ask people to, if they have lost their pets, to follow up, check around, look and see if the animals are being advertised on social media and so on. Because it's a really sad thing to be left with them, and it just adds to the burden that we have at the shelter. I have to say, in addition, this New Year's, I think between Saturday and Sunday, we took in, I think it was about 10 litters of abandoned puppies.
10
People
litters,
just kept calling us.
meaning multiple
boxes of puppies, just being dropped by garbage dumps and all over the place. So there's a real serious problem of abandonment, and the situation is, I think, getting worse in Trinidad. People have been commenting on it and saying the last time they visited, they found, this time they find there's so many more strays wandering on the beaches and all over. And it's very distressing, and it just creates this awful environment in the country. As well.
I'm an animal lover, so I'm here thinking about, and the poor dogs and cats are very, very much, without enough nutrition and that socialization as well. But I learned last year that we also have to consider how it affects us as humans directly, not just in terms of inconvenience, but sanitation and all these other things. Dog
control in the country actually is the responsibility of the municipal and regional corporations, and it comes under their division of public health. So it's considered a public health issue because there are aspects of, they call it zoonotic effects. Dogs can carry certain diseases that can affect human beings. And so even simple things like, schools calling in desperation because they have a flea problem and they have to close down all the classes because animals have moved on to the compounds. So, there are a lot of aspects where there's an impact on human health as well.
So that we should all be very concerned with institutions like the TTSPCA is needing help.
Well,
at the very least, we can all see the impact on us as individuals as well. And so in terms of that influx of strays, the litters, as you mentioned as well, it means that we might see heightened advertisements for adoption, perhaps, or heightened drives as well?
Well, we are constantly in adoption mode, right? Because, we're really always almost at full capacity, and we create space by rehoming. Last year, I have the figures for, it was sort of the end of 2023 towards the end of 2024. We rehomed 175 dogs and 164 cats, which sounds great, but it's actually a drop in the bucket. And we are constantly competing with, there are lots of groups now who have sprung up trying to help. So we're all competing with each other for homes.
Space,
and we're also competing with people who are breeding dogs, and that we saw an increase in that after COVID as a money-making venture. So huskies all over the place, Malinois, German Shepherds, whether they're well-bred or not is another matter, but it becomes more difficult for us to promote the kind of animals we have when in that kind of situation.
Let me just put in a plug here, guys. Any vet will tell you the best breed is a mixed breed because they will stand up against anything. So call them what you want, but they're going to survive. I think that it is a conversation we're going to continue this year. I know we've said that before, but I'm really going to make a valiant effort to have you come on some more because we could continue this conversation. I wondered at some point if there was ever a time when you had the entire shelter cleared, and it sounds like that has never happened.
The only time we really saw something like that was during COVID, surprisingly. A lot more people adopted,
Right, because
and
they
because
wanted
of the restrictions of
companions.
movement, we didn't have as many animals coming in. But as soon as that was over, it started all over again, you know. So it's really quite, it's a very difficult situation that we're constantly struggling with.
Well, on the brighter side, you can also give us some tidbits on how we can assist those dogs or cats that have been abandoned in terms of how, outside of bringing them to your institution only, are there any other things that we should be mindful of doing? Should we see any sorts of strays or lost?
Well, what we're seeing is a lot of people are actually trying to feed animals that are stray. We're seeing that all over the place. What is essential is for, if you are interested or in helping animals, what is essential is spaying and neutering. Because we're seeing it over and over again. People are feeding, but they're not attempting to control the population. And once you provide food, you're getting a growth in the population. And we have many areas now that are overrun, like with stray cats and so on, because people are feeding these animals. So I think spaying and neutering is actually essential, and it's to controlling your populations.
Okay.
And that is something that should be done. And I mean, we're always happy if people pick up or rescue particularly vulnerable animals like puppies and kittens, even though it puts a real strain on the NGOs. It's, at least the animals
Somebody has to do it.
Yeah, and they're not left there to suffer, you know.
Yeah. Well, we have a good bit of information in terms of what we can do and what you guys do. But if we wanted to collaborate forces, how can we find the TTSPCA? Remind us of contacts.
Right. So we are based, the Port of Spain shelter is based in St. James off Mukarapu Road. We have 2 telephone numbers, 2 landlines, 622-1367 and 628-1615. And I just would like to say, there are limits to what we can do. Sometimes, you know, people often call us expecting everything, but, you know, we have constraints and we try as much as we can to help, but we can't always promise.
Well, we do appreciate the efforts and we support the efforts, so that we will be chatting you up to check in perhaps in the next couple of months to see what has changed, and making sure that we do our part to help our little furry friends. For now, guys, you want to stick around after the commercial break because we're heading into the carnival season and we've got a few events that you might want to add to your calendar. Then our returns after this break.